the courtroom earlier and another day. And is he really expected to be back today?
That's the surprise that we're waiting for. It's clear to see that Melly isn't as jovial as he was when Boosie's in the courtroom on both days. Like when he was on there in day one, when he came, he lit up, and day two, he was very sad in the opening parts, very restless, very temperamental at that. And then when Boosie walked in, he was excited, back to being the same jovial self he was on day one. But as of today, he's still restless, even more tired, yawning, stretching, pacing back and forth with it and everything in that. And we're just going to have to wait and see if Boosie shows up at lunch.
Let me just give you a follow-up to that. Does the jury react to when Boosie is there?
No, the jury does not react when Boosie walks into the courtroom.
Very, very interesting. And we'll talk a little bit about the awning because we were doing the same thing here. But before I get to that, you mentioned in your tweets that YNW Melly rolled his eyes once, okay? Christopher Thomas's grandmother entered the courtroom. So what can you tell us about that? Does there seem to be some type of, animosity? Does there seem to be some kind of reaction? Give us the inside scoop.
Oh, it's clearly a lot of tension between the victim's family and YNW Melly. They make sure to look at him directly in his eyes every time they walk into the courtroom while they're sitting listening to the testimony, and just any other time that they can get, just to get him to look back at them. He usually looks past them or looks in different directions, doesn't even bother to give them any attention until it's unbearable. Until it's unbearable. Well, the defendant said that the two people who were killed, Sack Chaser and Juvie, were his best friends. But is there anything about the defendant's demeanor that could suggest to the jury that maybe he doesn't care as much about them as he said? Not at the moment. The way the prosecution is going right now, it's very unclear, very confusing, even for the jury. The jury has clearly been unattentive for day three.
Unattentive. Well, let's talk about that because we were here in the studio discussing the firearms examiner, George Bello, who's been on the stand, who seems like a lovely person. He seems very honest. He seems to know what he's talking about. But there hasn't been any connection to the gun and the shooter. So how did the jury react to his testimony? Were they yawning like you suggested?
They appear confused. They are listening to projectile examinations, and being that a lot of them aren't familiar with firearms, they are very much confused because they're not talking about an exact weapon, exact firearm that was used in the murder. It's just a he say, she say of particular firearms that are used that could be connected to the bullet fragments that were found.
And, I would be remiss, Bryson, if I didn't ask you something related to the opening of the defense. Was there anything in the testimony today, things that made you go,
I would say no. At the moment, no. There wasn't anything that made me go, but I was definitely along with everyone else in the courtroom as confused as to what the point was of showing or discussing this firearm, or a particular firearm that doesn't exist, or just an ideal of a firearm.